Imagine having thoughts about injustice, war, or the exploitation of the powerless, but having absolutely no way to express them. No voice, no language others understand, no ability to write or communicate, not because the thoughts are not there, but because the bridge between the mind and the world simply does not exist. This is not hypothetical. For most of history, that was the reality for millions of people. One of the most famous examples is Helen Keller. Helen Keller became deaf and blind at 19 months old after an illness. Without sight or hearing, she had no access to language. She could not speak, read, or communicate in any conventional way. To the outside world, she appeared unreachable. Then something extraordinary happened. A teacher named Anne Sullivan arrived. Anne Sullivan did something many people would not have had the patience to attempt. She believed that there was intelligence and meaning inside Helen Keller that simply lacked a pathway to escape. She began spelling words into Keller's hand using finger spelling. At first it meant nothing, just symbols pressed into skin. Then one day at a water pump, Anne Sullivan ran water over Keller's hand and spelled the letters WATER into her palm. And suddenly something clicked. Helen Keller later described that moment as the instant language burst open inside her mind. The world had names, thoughts had symbols, ideas had structure. From that moment on, she learned rapidly. She eventually attended Radcliffe College and became an author, lecturer, and political activist, writing multiple books and speaking internationally on labor rights, disability rights, and social justice. Think about that transformation for a moment. Without Anne Sullivan, Helen Keller would likely have remained locked inside silence. The intelligence was always there. The ideas were always there. What was missing was a bridge. Now fast forward to today. We are living through a technological moment where something remarkably similar is happening again, except this time the bridge is artificial intelligence. Today, millions of people have ideas, insights, and lived experiences that never reach the public conversation, not because they lack intelligence, but because they lack the tools that elite institutions consider acceptable. Some struggle with writing, some struggle with language, some struggle with disabilities. Some struggle simply because they never had access to academic pathways that teach people how to frame their thoughts in the way institutions recognize. And when these people use AI to help articulate their ideas, something interesting happens. The gatekeepers react. Research actually shows this bias exists. A study reported by Florida International University found that people often judge creative work more negatively when they know AI tools were involved, even if the final output is identical. In other words, the message becomes less important than the method used to produce it. But here is the irony. If Helen Keller were alive today and used AI to help articulate her thoughts, would these same critics dismiss her voice as artificial? Would they say the words were not really hers? Because that argument sounds remarkably similar to something society once believed. Before Braille was widely adopted, blind people were often excluded from literacy entirely. Many believed they simply could not participate in written culture. But once Braille was developed in the 19th century by Louis Braille, an entire world of communication opened for blind readers. Suddenly, the intelligence that had always existed could finally be expressed, and nobody argued that Braille meant blind authors were not the real authors of their own thoughts. Braille was simply a bridge, just like Anne Sullivan's finger spelling, and today AI is becoming another bridge. Modern research on assistive technologies shows that artificial intelligence is already transforming communication tools for people who cannot easily speak, write, or interact using conventional methods. AI-driven assistive systems can adapt to the needs of individuals and act as dynamic communication partners rather than simple tools. Eye tracking systems allow people with paralysis to write and speak through computers. Speech-to-text AI allows people with physical impairments to write books and research papers. Machine learning systems can translate cognitive intent into language. One example reported by Forbes describes an AI system that combines eye tracking with a digital avatar to restore expressive communication for people with severe paralysis, allowing them to convey tone, humor, and emotion in real time. Think about what that means. For the first time in history, we are building something like an army of Anne Sullivans, millions of patient digital teachers, tools that help people structure their thoughts, refine language, and express ideas that might otherwise remain trapped inside their minds. So when critics say AI will flood the world with voices, they are accidentally revealing something deeper. The real fear is not that AI will create voices. The fear is that AI will reveal voices that were already there, Voices that were previously filtered out by academic systems, publishing systems, and social systems that historically favored those with access to education, networks, and institutional legitimacy. For centuries, intellectual authority has been tightly controlled: degrees, journals, editorial boards, professional networks. These systems have produced tremendous knowledge, but they have also excluded enormous numbers of thinkers whose ideas never entered the conversation. And history shows us that genius does not belong exclusively to institutions. Many transformative ideas in science, engineering, and philosophy came from outsiders, self-taught thinkers, and people whose backgrounds did not match academic expectations. AI is now lowering the barrier to entry, not by replacing thought, but by helping people articulate thought. There is an important distinction here. AI can generate nonsense at scale. That is absolutely true, but nonsense existed long before AI. Bad books were written before computers. Weak arguments existed before language models. The difference today is that the tools that once belonged only to universities and professional writers are becoming available to everyone. And that means the signal-to-noise ratio might temporarily get worse, but the long-term effect may be something far more powerful: a vastly expanded intellectual landscape, more perspectives, more lived experience, more unconventional thinking, more voices from people who were historically invisible in the knowledge economy. Imagine multiplying Anne Sullivan 1,000,000 times. Imagine unlocking the potential of millions of people who simply needed help translating thought into language. The real question is not whether AI helps people speak. The real question is whether we are willing to listen, because the history of progress often comes down to a single uncomfortable question: do we judge the message, or do we judge the messenger? Helen Keller proved that brilliance can exist behind barriers most people cannot even imagine. Artificial intelligence may be removing some of those barriers, and if that is true, then the greatest intellectual expansion of our era might not come from machines. It might come from the millions of human minds that finally gain the ability to speak.